Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first keynote panel discussion of the 3 days here in the Access Industry Forum Knowledge Base. For those of you that were here last year, what we intend to do with the first discussion of these 3 days is actually lead on from one of the important discussions that started last year, and that is to talk about one of the new British standards that are coming along that will affect anybody and everybody who has anything at all to do with working at height, and this is starting very much from the core principles with regards to working at height. Before I go into more detail, we're very privileged here to have a very distinguished lineup of guest panelists here. From the far end we have Tony Baker, representing the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. We have Paul Bussey from the Royal Institute of British Architects, and he's also chairman of the development of the British Standard. Richard Habgood from the Association of Project Safety, and Barry Murphy from Access Industry Forum. In particular, member is SEMA, the Suspended Access Specialist. So before we go into the detail of what this new British Standard is all about, I want to first of all maybe come to Barry. And Barry, from what I understand, this British Standard is all about trying to highlight more in terms of the design aspect from regards to if you're an architect or a designer in terms of considerations working at height. I wanted to come to you first, and maybe if you can just quickly summarise maybe one or two examples where at the moment you see day-to-day challenges with examples to poor considerations for working at height.
Yes, good afternoon. I think the main issue for the permanent suspended access industry is we've very often approached very late in the design process to provide a solution, a design solution to maintain the external envelope of a building. For us, the new standard would greatly help the industry through early engagement. Early engagement lets us design a fully considered solution, and not, as we currently in many projects, late in the day we're coming on, this is what space we've got left, how can you put 45 tonne of plant on the roof without me seeing it and without it impacting the structure as a whole. So there are a number of standards and regulations out there. From the industry point of view, the main objective is to bring the standards together, or one point of reference which covers all elements of access from an ongoing maintenance perspective of buildings.
Okay, thank you. Paul, if I can come to you, the chairman of the new British Standard, you're the kingpin for this whole development. Can you maybe, just for the benefit of the audience here, summarise really the intention of what the new British Standard is about?
Certainly, Neil. Welcome, everybody. Big question. We started as an architectural design fraternity, trying to work with these gentlemen around the table and others to understand their difficulties, but also to explain the difficulties of designing in a very pressing industry, in very tough economic times, but with these high expectations of great quality design. And our designers are out there trying to produce world-breaking designs, but in a safe way. And the title, which perhaps isn't explained here, is that the title of the document is about BS for design of buildings incorporating safe working at height. The objective being that we just heard about PAS, platforms, etc. We've heard about ladders, which if aren't tethered and used incorrectly, are not appropriate. But the HSE, in one of their mythbusters, is using ladders in a safe way. They're not banned. They're not unsafe empirically unless they're used unsafely. So we're very much trying to get a level playing field across the industry. Good design, good safety work together. They're not different agendas.
Okay, so what you're saying is architects will now take a responsibility specifically through this working at height for the consideration of working at height.
Yeah, to assist the industry to produce safe working at height, but not necessarily not designing a new St Paul's Cathedral or Westminster Abbey, for example.
Right.
Taking medieval context, that we had some fantastic design in the medieval and Renaissance period. We don't want to dilute that these days because of working at height. We want safe working at height to achieve these objectives. And trying to get that union, conjunction of views is a very difficult process, and people take moral high grounds, or other people are told that as designers they're being totally arrogant. There are parties in both camps. We're trying to bring those together to get some sort of common sense, as was mentioned by Professor Losted's review this morning.
Right, interesting. Okay, Tony, if I can come to you, chartered surveyors, generally, I guess, maybe have a reputation that, you know, it's all about driving out the costs and getting the price down as low as possible. I guess in terms of the point in the supply chain between, say, someone like Barry and someone like Paul, is that you're somewhere in the middle, and that maybe if the intentions are what Paul is alluding to in terms of British standards, in terms of architects now being much more aware of safe working at height and suggesting the solutions that might be out there, Barry's at the other end saying that actually solutions aren't even being thought about, it's far too late. With you guys coming in the middle, are you going to sort of fall into line with what the architects take, or is it very much you're sort of going to still come and say, no, we still got to go down to that low cost, we've got to drive some cost out somewhere?
Right. I think the first thing I would say is that, picking up on Paul's point, none of this is really new. If you go back to, say, the old railway stations in the 1850s, 1860s, they built big buildings with glass roofs. They considered access. When they built the cathedrals and other buildings, they considered how do you get up onto the roof and for maintenance and what have you. So we're not looking at new problems. We're just looking at problems that have persisted ever since we started building and structures. I think on Barry's point, where we've gone wrong in recent years is that we've always brought in the specialist knowledge too late. And from the surveyor's point of view, if you're looking at the overall cost of maintaining buildings and everything, it's very, very important that you get the right solutions considered very early in the process. So I would agree with Barry that we need to bring these specialist people, consultants, into the picture very early in the design process. And I'm sure that Paul would agree with me that this is one of the key areas where the new British standard could help.
So you think the new British standard will succeed in encouraging the solution experts coming to the process much earlier?
Because overall, it's cheaper to understand where the issues lie right at the beginning of the process and plan for it, rather than try and tack something on at the end of the process. Because, say for example, with the access equipment, if you've designed a structure and you haven't taken the type of equipment that you're going to introduce into account at the beginning, have you got the structure right? Do you have to then redesign the structural elements? Right. So it is important that you get all these factors taken into account right at the beginning.
Okay, thank you. Richard, coming to you. Richard, Association Project Safety, that's all about CDM and CDMCs. What we're hearing so far is that basically the solution experts are going to talk much earlier in the process. From your point of view, I guess you guys are generally sort of the middlemen trying to identify the risks and trying to find a solution as quickly as possible. This has all got to be good news to you, right?
It certainly is good news for every CDM coordinator throughout the United Kingdom and elsewhere, actually. What I'm actually hearing is the setting of a standard that will provide information and education to a design team on subjects which most CDM coordinators have been banging on for years. We're talking about buildability issues, usability and maintainability. If we look at the last one first, that might be cleaning of facades and so forth and so on. But buildability is a very important topic that I think that the new British standard will help designers learn and understand just what their responsibilities are to reduce the hazards and therefore reduce the risks arising during the construction phase and certainly through the maintainability phase of the lifetime of the building.
Okay, so Paul, on the bridge standard, again, just to be clear, what we're spelling out for architects is throughout the whole life of a project. Is that right? In terms of considerations, it's not about just construction phase, it's not about post-construction, it's about the entire life of a project. Is that right?
Absolutely, Neil, and that was fundamental. We were some 6 or 7 months into the programme, and it's becoming evident that other people around the table didn't quite understand that architects work in a very progressive, from concept stage design right through to final detail design and then on-site work. There could even be changes during the on-site phase and then up to final completion. So it was very much a case of explaining that progressive process to our other colleagues, and some of them knew a bit about it, but they didn't quite know how it all fell together. And so we've actually produced a document which is usable by architects if they're working at the concept stage or the detailed design stage or the scheme design stage, to know what levels of information or consultation they need to have to that stage of the project. And the fact that the client also has to sign these off and be part of that during this progressive process. If at a certain stage in the middle there's a re-evaluation by the CDMC saying, oh, we've got to eliminate this working at height, that is far too late in the process to actually introduce that level of elimination. So we need, as Barry says, to get experts or people who understand sufficiently about the working at height challenges on that job as an early stage. Now that might be individual consultants, it might be architects or structural engineers who have experience of those issues, but hopefully they've been appointed because they've got some understanding of those issues in the first place. But it's knowing your limitations and when to apply those throughout the job, which is the big lack currently, I would suggest.
Yeah. I mean, what fundamentally you're talking about in almost the majority of cases, though, is a change of culture in terms of getting in the likes of Barry in much earlier in the process. And Tony, coming back to you from a cost point of view, you know, we're almost talking about, before we're breaking ground now, I guess from the way you're talking, about getting the solution experts involved. Now that is naturally going to have a cost involved. How does that pan out in terms of, you know, project costs, life costs, etc.? You know, in terms of who's going to pick up that tab?
Well, the person who's going to have to pick up the tab is the client, because they must understand that in a project, by bringing in the expertise right at the beginning, overall it's actually going to save them money in the initial construction phase, but more importantly, looking at the lifetime cycle cost, that there are lots of things to take into account, and by getting the right access solution right early on in the process, and I think also one of the issues is that clients need to be made aware of the options, because there's not always a single option. So you might have fixed gantries, you might go for mutes or step ladders or whatever. So I think the important thing with the new standard is that it will make the whole project team think, and the project team with the quantity surveyors and the cost consultants should be able to make the clients aware of, if you go for this option, it's going to cost you this much now, but over the life cycle of the building it will cost you X amount.
And potentially have a saving.
Because you can put a building up cheaply, but it can cost an enormous amount over its lifetime to maintain it. So they're the sort of options that have got to be discussed early on in the design process.
Buildability,
yeah,
is what you're saying, is buildability, isn't it?
And maintainability.
Barry, coming back to you, it's interesting what Tony picks up in terms of, it almost sounds like educating the client. In your experience, when you're facing these challenges, have you found that you're hitting resistance from the client, or is it the architect, or has it gone past that stage? And it's basically, I guess what I'm getting to here is this British standard sounds like it's a good thing, but it seems to be targeting at architects and designers. And is that where the problem is, or is it actually at the client end, or is it somewhere else in between?
I think generally the clients are pretty good, and most of the clients we work with are quite proactive because they're looking at the revenue cost of operating these systems. You can install a system on a building that's half the cost of the next equivalent system. It costs you 4 times as much to operate on an annual basis because of the labour content required to use it. One important thing that Tony touched upon, and is really important for the standard as a whole, it brings together all the different access options that are available and are provided by the Access Industry Forum members. There has been this sort of tendency to make a decision to go down one route or another. We either go with a big crane type machine, or we rope access, or we use mutes. The reality is you can use a combination of systems to access a building. Some areas would warrant a £500,000 crane. Some areas maybe just a single davit with a rope access point. Reception areas, ground level areas up to 4 metres. Aluminium towers are quite adequate. So, and having to presented a number of seminars to project safety guys, you tend to see a polarisation that there's a decision made, we either go this way or we go that way. We don't. You can use all sorts of options on a single building. We've done projects with high value crane type machines, monorails, rope access points, gantries. There's a whole combination of products. You don't need to decide on one solution for one project. You can mix and match. And I think this is very important. It brings all the available products and means of access that are out there and identifies them in one standard and says, look, these are the guys you need to go to, and you need to go to them as early as possible. A big problem is always the underlying commercial issues. Cost is always, we tend to get involved at the construction stage. As soon as we're involved with the main contractors, buildability takes a second issue, usability takes a second issue. It's what's it got to cost me, what's the cheapest solution. But then you're clearly talking in two camps. You're looking at cheapest solution from a point of view of procurement, or cheapest solutions from a point of view of revenue costs. Unfortunately, the revenue costs with main contractors tend to get looked at as a secondary issue. They're looking at building the building, handing the keys over, and they're off, and they're not necessarily tied up in the ongoing maintenance of costs of running and maintaining that building.
Okay, thanks Barry. Richard, coming to you CDMs, British Standard 8560 is obviously on its way. From your point of view, this sounds like a big stick to be hitting architects with. Is that right?
No, I would not describe it as a big stick. I would describe it as being a very helpful stick, if you want to use that word, to everybody involved in the construction process. It will certainly assist all types of designers, be they permanent designers or temporary works designers even, because we're talking simple things like basic scaffolding, right through to mutes and so forth and so on, working on roofs and... but what I actually think about the British Standard is that it can only be a good thing for everyone involved in the process. I'd just like to go back on the procurement method, if I may. What I find in lots of projects up and down and around the country, we've talked a lot about costs and how the initial client always wants to drive down costs. Unless we change that psyche of operation, the designers are still going to have a problem. Too often the developer has an end user in mind, but he immediately sells on the development once he's finished. He's not concerned about usability and maintainability, and this is a problem that the industry needs to overcome. And I'm sure that the introduction of 8560 will help everyone realise that the permanency, to provide aids on a permanent basis, can only do the structure good to keep the overall costs down during the lifetime of the structure.
Okay, thanks Richard. So Paul, where are we with British Standard? What stage is it at now? I mean, we were talking about this last year. Is it close to being ready now?
Yeah, it's going out for public consultation this summer with a view to getting feedback by about November, December.
Going out this summer.
That's right.
Okay. So
that's
open
last I heard.
consultation. What does that entail? I mean, there's a lot of
This
people
is
here.
my first BS that I've chaired, so BS will have to tell you that as far as I can do. It depends on how much comment comes back,
Okay.
and we have to respond, I know, to every one of those comments, which we will do. So it's a process of, Losted got, the Red Tape Challenge got 1,400, I think, so hopefully we don't get quite as many as that, or we'll be here for a long time. So it's dependent on the interest in the industry, frankly.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm not quite sure the communication process of this, but we'll obviously put notification on the AIF website, as I'm sure REBA will, and probably the rest of these associations will in terms of notification. At this point, I just want to sort of put it out to the audience. Is there any particular questions you want to ask the panel here in terms of this? I mean, what we're talking about here is fundamentally having projects coming up, which I assume of all sizes of projects. We're not just talking about the large multi-storey buildings.
We're talking from small to huge, and the idea is it's understanding the design process.
Right.
We're not talking about every bit of access equipment, because there's lots of information out there that's far better than us to do. Otherwise our document would be massive. It's about how we coordinate the design, selection, cost, value, and weigh up all those considerations and other factors and produce safe design at the same time. On a level playing field, and
So
that's
it is
the
open
objective.
to
And it's only
all
39 pages. I'll add.
Only
One of our
30.
aspirations was about 25 pages. We've exceeded that, but we're not going to go into the 100 pages. No one will bother reading it. It is meant to be short, precise, quick, concise. People can use it as a working document when they're designing their buildings. Give it to the client and say, what about paragraph 36, whatever, and it's a usable document.
Right. Okay. So, any questions at all from the audience at all? Yes, sir. Just.
It is a standard, not a regulation. But how is it going to be policed in terms of compliance to ensure that it's going to be compliant?
Shall I answer that? Or Tony has a better compliance mind than me, but it is not regulation. It's not legislation. It is good practice. And if you don't comply with it, then you've got to have a good reason. If something happens and you go to court, that's my understanding of it. But Tony can probably give you a better legalistic view.
Right. I think the important thing is that, as Paul stated, is guidance. So that is a tier down from approved code of practice and regulation. I think the essence of the British Standard is that it's making designers and project team think about what they're doing. So if you've got a project and you totally ignore all these considerations about work at height and get it wrong, then quite rightly you will be taken to task, and the fact that you ignored totally the guidance may put you into problems. If we're looking at a fatality, the Corporate Manslaughter Act allows the juries to consider, when they're making a judgment as to whether someone before the court has been grossly negligent, they can take into account industry guidance. So if you're not able to defend yourself by saying, well, we looked at the regulations, we looked at the ACOP, and as part of our project team, we looked at the guidance and we properly considered all the options. That's your get out of jail card. If you're completely ignorant of the guidance and you get it wrong because you have ignored it, then you might end up before the courts.
Right. Thank you, Tony. Just very finally, because we now got to round up, I just wanted put it out to the audience, a quick show of hands, whether from what you've heard here, whether you think this new British standard coming along is a good idea. Have a show of hands for those who think it's a good idea. That's a pretty good show of hands so far, Paul. It looks like you're on to a winner there.
50%. Yeah,
Good. Okay. Well, look, we're running out of time here, so I want to thank you all for coming and watching this presentation. I should let you know the whole presentation's been filmed. The intention is that shortly you'll be able to watch this again online on the AIF website, and there'll be a facility there to carry on this discussion. So there'll be a whole comments area there. So if there's anything you think, either after the event or you haven't had time to raise here, you'll be able to go on the website and continue it there. But for now, I'd just like to thank you all, thank the guests for coming, thank you all for watching the panel, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Hi Richard, was that a useful discussion?
It most certainly was. I'm hoping that everybody learns a little bit more about the work of the committee developing the new British standard, and hopefully we've got a timetable now so that when it's introduced in perhaps 6 to 12 months of time from now, the industry embraces the work that the committee have done and take it on board in all future designs and considerations for new structures in the United Kingdom.
Was there any information from the discussion today that was of interest to you?
Yeah, there was, yeah.
Can you tell me what that was?
Designers and architects basically CDM put it together to make it more better. Really.